They told you to remember the Alamo. They never told you what actually happened inside it. One man walked out alive. Not a general, not a colonel, an enslaved man named Joe. And he saw everything. He felt the bayonet scrape his ribs. He watched Travis bleed out and drive his sword into a Mexican general with his last breath. He heard Santa Anna vow to plant his flag in Washington City. Then his testimony was buried. Not lost, buried. Tonight, the eyewitness account history quietly erased meets 8 things about the Alamo no official record has ever explained. The survivors told a very different story. But before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. As white Southern settlers moved farther into Texas, they brought dreams of claiming land to build cotton plantations. Mexico's cotton industry was booming at the time, and many sought to profit from it. But Mexican officials required settlers to meet 2 conditions to occupy their territory. First, settlers had to convert to Catholicism. Second, they needed to register as formal Mexican citizens. Once established, however, many colonists ignored these rules, straining relations with their hosts from the start. Adding to the conflict, most settlers arrived with enslaved people, even though Mexico had banned slavery in 1829. As settlers persisted in defying Mexican laws, retaining enslaved laborers and occupying territories beyond their granted limits, the Mexican government was experiencing its own shift in governance. Initially modeled after the decentralized federal structure of the United States, growing financial instability and widespread disorder led conservative leaders to consolidate authority into a centralized system. Under this new regime, stricter enforcement of trade tariffs, anti-slavery laws, and immigration regulations followed. For settlers in Mexican Texas's borderlands, this spelled trouble. Many were undocumented immigrants whose enterprises relied on enslaved workers. Labeling the policies authoritarian, settlers initiated rebellions. Mexican officials attributed the turmoil to illegal American migrants who resisted complying with the nation's laws. The Texas Revolution's opening clash occurred in October 1835 with the Battle of Gonzalez, though tensions had simmered days earlier in an American colony founded by Green DeWitt. DeWitt had earlier persuaded Mexican authorities to provide the colony with a 6-pound cannon to defend against raids from indigenous groups deemed threatening. When Mexico discovered DeWitt's delegates attended meetings viewed as rebellious, Colonel Domingo de Ugartechea was ordered to reclaim the cannon. While anticipating pushback, the colonel likely never imagined this routine task would ignite skirmishes between Texan settlers and Mexican troops, clashes that snowballed into open battle and ultimately revolution. True to form, the Texans rejected demands to return the cannon. Leaving no ambiguity, they draped a flag over the weapon boldly stating, "Come and take it." Within days, Texan forces grew to over 160 men. Executing a surprise assault, they overpowered Mexican soldiers. With this confrontation, the Texas Revolution erupted in earnest. While recognized today as a fort, the Alamo was initially constructed as a mission, a religious compound serving missionaries as a hub for resources and coordination. Following raids by local indigenous communities, Mexican military forces later repurposed the site into a provisional fortification. However, the modified structure was built to resist tribal assaults, not sustained artillery barrages. It also lacked dedicated rifle ports for defenders. Elevated walkways let soldiers fire over the walls but exposed their upper bodies when standing, a significant tactical drawback. Following the Battle of Gonzalez, many settlers who aided in repelling Mexican forces returned home. Unprepared for prolonged conflict and lacking supplies, their departure rapidly reduced the Texan forces to fewer than 200 men. This diminished force fell far short of the strength required to defend a structure like the Alamo. In December 1835, Sam Houston, commander-in-chief of the Texan Army, instructed James Neal to assume control of the Alamo. Neal complied but abandoned his post months later to tend to sick relatives. Leadership then shifted to Lieutenant Colonel William B. Travis, the senior officer present. News of Travis's promotion displeased Colonel James Bowie, renowned for his namesake knife. Many soldiers shared this sentiment, voting Bowie into command due to his fearsome combat reputation. The decision might have settled tensions, but Bowie marked his ascent by drunkenly disrupting camp. Ultimately, he conceded to joint leadership with Travis. Mexican President Santa Anna grew more enraged by the day as the Texas Rebellion persisted. He viewed the revolutionaries as illegal settlers who'd invaded his nation, scorned its customs and laws, and now sought to seize its territory. Unsurprisingly, he demanded their surrender or face annihilation. The Texans rejected his ultimatum, prompting Santa Anna to brand them traitors and vow to grant no quarter. He formalized this stance in a letter to U.S. President Andrew Jackson. Yet the message wasn't widely circulated, and Jackson neglected to warn American volunteers that Mexico planned to execute captives. Alamo commanders realistically assessed their dire situation. Aware of their shortages in supplies and troops, they recognized the looming crisis once Mexican forces arrived. Colonel James Neal urgently petitioned General Sam Houston for aid. Houston, however, deemed reinforcements unattainable and denied the plea. Instead, he dispatched Colonel James Bowie with roughly 30 men to dismantle the fort's artillery and demolish the structure. Upon arrival, Bowie found no livestock to haul the heavy cannons. Convinced of the site's tactical value, he lobbied the Texas Provisional Government directly for additional soldiers and arms. His efforts failed. The government, mired in chaos, offered no support. Even if aid had been approved, it likely wouldn't have mattered. Bowie and Travis gravely misjudged how swiftly Santa Anna's forces would strike. Santa Anna's siege of the Alamo commenced on February 23, 1836. Warnings of the approaching Mexican army triggered mass evacuations in nearby Bexar. Though skeptical, Travis stationed a lookout in San Fernando Church's bell tower. Within hours, scouts spotted Mexican forces just over a mile from town. The Texans remained critically underprepared, lacking troops, arms, and supplies for prolonged conflict. Their vulnerability became stark when Santa Anna entered San Antonio with 1,500 soldiers. The Alamo's defenders numbered a mere 188. Worse still, many were untrained volunteers. Yet when Santa Anna raised the red flag signaling no mercy would be shown, the Texans refused to retreat. Travis answered by firing a cannon at Mexican positions. Bowie viewed this aggression as reckless and sent an envoy to parley with Santa Anna. Travis, irritated by Bowie's meddling, dispatched his own messenger. Mexican officers received both representatives, insisting surrender must be unconditional. Upon hearing this, Bowie and Travis reconciled their rivalry and jointly fired the cannon in defiance. The Alamo's defenders were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. One might assume they leaned on Colonel James Bowie, an experienced combat leader, for guidance. Yet Bowie fell seriously ill by the siege's second day, leaving him utterly incapacitated. 2 physicians, including the fort's doctor, examined him but couldn't pinpoint his condition. Bowie was occasionally paraded before the troops to boost morale, though historians suggest this spectacle likely undermined morale. Observing their supposed hero bedridden disheartened the largely untrained defenders. In the Alamo's final grim hours, Bowie relinquished his command to Travis. He died alongside all 188 defenders, though his family sheltering at the fort survived. The siege ended on March 6, 1836, lasting 13 days until every Texan combatant perished. Only women and children were spared. Despite the crushing defeat, scholars estimate the small force caused approximately 600 Mexican casualties. More critically, the Alamo's fall ignited a defiant spirit among Texans, morphing into a rallying cry that spurred the revolution toward Texas's independence. The Alamo fell. 188 defenders lay dead. A revolution was born. But the echoes of those 13 days still whisper unanswered questions. Why did Travis and Bowie, rivals to the end, fire that final cannon together? What truly killed James Bowie, a hidden illness or a darker secret? And why did Santa Anna's unstoppable army pay such a bloody price for victory? The Alamo's defenders became legends, but legends bury truths. What if the real story isn't about heroes, but about flaws? Flaws in leadership, flaws in loyalty, flaws that doomed them all. 8 strange things, 8 questions history left deliberately unanswered. But here's what the textbooks never told you. One man was inside the Alamo when every one of those questions had an answer. He watched it all unfold in real time. He survived when nobody else did. His name was Joe, and what he saw that morning makes everything you just heard look like the sanitized version. This is his account, word for word, unfiltered. We defenders had been worn down to the bone by days of relentless vigilance and arduous toil. On the eve of that fateful Sabbath, every soul labored deep into the night, our weary limbs collapsing into slumber mere hours before the assault, sentinels and all, save for Captain, whose sharp cry pierced the stillness. 3 guardsmen posted beyond the walls likely shared this fatal repose, for no warning shout arose. The enemy's steel found their mark in silence, swift and merciless. I lay abed in my master's quarters when the clamor began. Colonel Travis bolted upright, musket in hand, sword gleaming at his hip, and barked for me to follow. I obeyed, snatched my own weapon, and trailed his desperate sprint. Travis clambered onto the ramparts, voice raw as he roared to his men, "Rally now, lads! The devils are at our throats. We'll meet 'em with fire and brimstone." A flash erupted from his barrel. My own shot echoed it. But scarcely had the smoke cleared when Travis staggered, struck low. He slumped against the inner slope, struggling to rise, his lifeblood staining the earth where he sat. Twice did they raise their ladders, twice repelled by desperate hands, though I scarcely witnessed it. When my master fell, I ducked into a storeroom, later loosing shot after shot through its loophole even as the tide breached the walls. On their third assault, the invaders scaled unchallenged, flooding the yard like some relentless tide. What followed was butchery, pure and primal. Men grappled hand to hand, clubbed muskets cracking skulls, blades gutting bellies, pistols pressed to ribs, and fired point blank. No quarter given nor sought, only the grim guttural work of survival until the last Texian breath was spent. Colonel Travis, wounded and slumped upon the bloodied earth, still clutched his sword when General Morris strode past. The Mexican officer swung his blade downward, a killing stroke, but Travis parried the blow with a desperate strength and thrust his own steel deep into the general's gut. Both men collapsed there, locked in death's embrace. It was my master's final act of defiance. The few Americans still standing fell back to whatever shelter the crumbling walls afforded, fighting on until only a frail fellow named Warner remained. He dropped his weapon, crying out for mercy. The soldiers spared him, but when Santa Anna himself arrived, he coldly ordered the man shot. I heard the volley from my hiding place. As for Jim Bowie, they say he fired his pistol through the door of his sick room until his last breath. When the enemy found him, his body lay hacked nearly beyond recognition. Davy Crockett and a handful of his companions were discovered in a heap, surrounded by 24 Mexican dead. A grim testament to their resolve. The women and Negroes in the fort, myself included, were mostly spared. Only one woman perished. A stray ball caught her as she dashed between the cannons. After the killing ceased, officers moved through the carnage, shouting for any Negroes to show themselves. I stepped forward, trembling. "Here's one," I called. 2 soldiers lunged at me. One fired his musket. The ball bit into my side. The other jabbed his bayonet, the tip scraping my ribs. I thought myself dead until Captain Barragan intervened, barking orders to stay their hands. When the smoke cleared, the Mexicans spared most of us Negroes, along with a handful of their own womenfolk, among them the wife of some surgeon and her sister, a Miss Navarro. Both were sent back to their father, a Don Angel Navarro, in Bexar under guard. Mrs. Dickinson, widow of the lieutenant, and her babe were likewise spared, though I heard later they were escorted across the lines into Texas under a tattered flag of truce. Once the killing stopped, Santa Anna ordered his men into a hollow square. He strode to the center and harangued them with fiery gestures, his voice sharp as a saber. The soldiers roared back, their cheers thick enough to choke the morning air. The general struck me as a lean, long-limbed fellow, dressed simpler than any officer I'd seen. Just a plain wool coat, no medals or finery to mark his rank. Like one of them Methodist preachers, I told the Mexicans when they pressed me to describe him. They dragged me to Bexar afterward, held me there for days. Once they marched me out to gawk at their army's grand review, rows of infantry and cavalry stretching across the plain, their banners flapping like vulture wings. A sneering captain claimed they numbered 8,000, but any man who'd trod that ground knew better. The field they'd mustered on was all gullies and scrub oak, barely fit to hold half that count. Santa Anna himself questioned me in a dim room reeking of gunpowder and sweat. His eyes bored into mine as he demanded answers about Texas, how many men we'd mustered, whether more Yankee soldiers were riding to join the fight. "Will they send more?" he snapped, pacing like a caged wolf. When I stammered that I knew nothing, he smirked and drew himself tall. "No matter," he said. "I've armies enough to plant my flag in your Washington City." His tone turned icy, as though the very idea amused him. Later, I watched through a slit in the wall as Mexican soldiers piled our dead, Travis, Crockett, the others, into a ghastly heap. They doused the bodies with oil and set them ablaze. The smoke coiled black against the sky, carrying a stench that clung to my clothes for days. Some of the men laughed as they tossed on splintered timbers to feed the flames. Others crossed themselves and turned away. Joe Travis's testimony survived. But the questions it raises? They burn hotter than Santa Anna's pyres. Why did Santa Anna spare Joe, only to nearly kill him moments later? Why erase Travis's final act of defiance from official reports?